Hi, I didn't see you there. Well, my name is Y, and I love DreamWorks. DreamWorks is my absolute favorite animation company, and I'll definitely love them more than I'll ever love Disney or Pixar, because unlike Disney or Pixar, and I guess this is a hot take, DreamWorks just makes me feel something in a way that most of those other movies just tend to not do. And I know other people feel somewhat similar because I've been a part of the fandom. And boy, can that fandom get weird. For those who tend to be like casual watchers of the animation genre or don't pay attention to it a lot, I feel like DreamWorks has sort of had this reputation as being like the zany animal movie company, which I guess is sort of true, but there's a whole lot more to this company than that. And most of their films are usually very flawed, but in my opinion, that helps make the sincerity that some of these movies have even more entertaining and adorable, because you could really feel like the aching for some type of perfection because they never ever reach it. Now, I started focusing heavily on DreamWorks filmography during the first few trailers of Onward. Now, Onward is a movie produced by Pixar, but there was a lot of critiques saying that Onward kind of feels like a DreamWorks movie. And that got me thinking, what makes a DreamWorks movie the way it is? Why does this movie feel like one? And I decided to do more research in their films to help figure this out. Now, lots of people act like DreamWorks doesn't have a brand in the same way that Pixar or Disney does, but I strongly disagree with that. DreamWorks does have a brand, and their movies show it, but just like anything else, their brand has partially changed since they've begun. And I want to get into why their brand and the movies they've made have changed over the years. So buckle up and get ready for a tale of passion, spite, and a surprising amount of woman power, like way much more than you'd think. Now I'm going to be breaking down all my research into about 4 or 5 episodes to help break down why DreamWorks is the way it is, why they've made the things they've made, and why they've changed since then, and where are they now. But first, we must start at the beginning, you see. The beginning of it all. The beginning of DreamWorks. What is DreamWorks Animation? Now, if you're not a huge fan of animation, or you just haven't paid lots of attention to studios, let's break it down for you. Now, some of the movies that DreamWorks has made are Shrek, Madagascar, Home, B-Movie, Boss Baby, How to Train Your Dragon, and Kung Fu Panda. Some of the movies that DreamWorks haven't made are any of the Ice Age movies, Rio, The Incredibles, Despicable Me, Minions, etc. So now that we have a vague understanding, let's get into the meat of this. Part 1. Who is Jeffrey Katzenberg? Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the Disney drama with him and Eisner because, well, that has been covered many times. That is not the focus of this video. We are here to focus on his life after Disney. But if you are interested in learning more information about his history in Disney, I might recommend Saber Sparks' What Ruined DreamWorks video, or like one of the many Disney-themed Lindsay Ellis videos that she has done, because she's done quite a few. Or, if you're really interested, you could just read Disney Wars, a really, really thick book that I only partially read for this video. Either way, not getting into the history of Disney and Katzenberg, but I think it's important to know who Katzenberg is, the man, the myth, the legend, the Quibi director. But more importantly, Quibi founder Jeffrey Katzenberg also led Disney through the Disney Renaissance, one of the most popular and lucrative times for Disney animation. Now, what is this period, you might ask? Well, Jeffrey helped make this, the good one, and this, to start off with a few. He's also helped create some live-action classics like Pretty Woman, but I'm not getting into this because this is an animated video. And whether Eisner, the CEO of Disney at the time, liked it or not, Katzenberg was basically well known for helping to produce and bring these films to life. Katzenberg was a mogul. He made millions and billions of dollars, not only for the company, but for himself. It's safe to say that he was, and still kind of is, a big name in the animation industry. Part 2, a breakup and a makeover. In August 1994, Disney announced that Katzenberg will be leaving the company after 10 years of working there. In October 1994, Katzenberg starts DreamWorks. Apparently, all of this kind of went down over a phone call where they decided to just, make a production company. Paul Allen was a huge investor. Not that Paul Allen. And this company was supposed to be the next big thing that breaks bank. Now, it's important to know that during the 90s, the movie industry was growing quite stagnant at the time. The last major studio to be created was 60 years ago, with United Artists created by Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks. And DreamWorks wasn't just any old studio, it had basically kings of the industry behind it. Steven Spielberg had just gotten off his Oscar wins with Schindler's List, and he just made bank with Jurassic Park, not only changing the game when it came to digital effects, but also just creating a fantastic blockbuster that's still iconic to this very day. David Geffen, probably the least known one and the one you care least about, was a huge music mogul who just finished selling his company for $700 million. And lastly, we have Jeffrey Katzenberg, who just went off creating the Disney Renaissance, creating hits after hits, movies that broke Oscar barriers that really weren't done before. And in general, just a very well-known guy in an era where Hollywood producers were kind of front page news. And so we end up with Spielberg, Katzenberg, Geffen, DreamWorks SKG. According to an interview with Laporte, author of The Men Who Would Be King, none of these three guys were startup guys. These were established figures in the industry, and they kind of just wanted to make money, which probably isn't the best way to go into making a company, and which is probably why DreamWorks SKG would be bought by Paramount for $1.6 billion, approximately 57% of Avengers Endgame's box office. But we're not here to talk about DreamWorks Pictures, we're here to talk about DreamWorks Animation. But to truly understand DreamWorks Animation, we need to go into more details about DreamWorks Pictures and how to start a movie studio, basically. Now, unlike other established movie studios of the time, DreamWorks Pictures had to create their entire library from fresh. And why are movie libraries important? Well, New York Times author Sandra Solomon writes, "The movie's value lies in their ability to be recycled after their theatrical release, in subsequent releases, home video, paid television, network television, and syndication. As a film moves down the entertainment chain, it can generate millions of dollars for its owners." So DreamWorks had to make their films good so they could have this rewatchability in order to succeed. It wasn't good enough to just make a movie that people watched once. So let's see how DreamWorks played with the big boys. Part 3. How to sort of succeed in the animation business while actually trying. So DreamWorks had to basically start all over and start their entire animation studio from scratch. They would get most of their animation done by 3 companies, PDI, Aardman Animation, and Amblimation. Amblimation from Amblin Entertainment, aka Steven Spielberg's studio, would be the one who would supply DreamWorks with all of their 2D projects. Originally in 1995, a year after DreamWorks was founded, they would use some of Amblimation's animators and take them over to DreamWorks Animation. In 1997, Amblimation would be officially shut down and just fully joined into DreamWorks Animation. Pacific Data Images, aka PDI, is where DreamWorks would create a lot of their CGI projects. In 1995, DreamWorks SKG would form a subsidiary with PDI to create their own department. Not only would this be used for CGI films, but it would also be used for just regular special effects and their other live action projects. And in 2000, DreamWorks would officially buy a majority of PDI, turning it to DreamWorks/PDI. And lastly is Aardman Animations, which is a company where DreamWorks were used to create their stop motion films. They first started a relationship in 1997 when DreamWorks bought the distribution rights for Chicken Run. Fun fact, they beat out Disney, Fox, Warner, the works, right? And then officially in 1999, DreamWorks would create a full 4-picture deal with them where they would create 4 films under them. Katzenberg and DreamWorks would help produce them, and then DreamWorks would also distribute them. Plot twist, only 3 were made. Let's find out why. And with all these different companies working with DreamWorks Pictures SKG, it's kind of important to know who exactly ran all this. David Geffen, one of the original founders, never really was in office, and he didn't do much, and he didn't really have an active role, so that's the last we'll ever hear of him. Steven Spielberg had his own directorial career to deal with, but when he was in charge with DreamWorks, he mostly focused on DreamWorks Pictures, although he did have a part to play in DreamWorks Animation. But Katzenberg, my favorite rich guy named Jeff, was the one who was mostly in charge of DreamWorks Animation. DreamWorks Animation was his baby, and due to the leadership in charge, the fact that there was a large variety of animation studios working with them at the time, and the fact that they're a brand new company, I would like to call the era from 1994 to 2004 the experimental era of DreamWorks. I call this era the experimental era because it seems like the time where DreamWorks is just throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. They're definitely the most experimental in styles of animation, stories they tell, and just how they kind of go about making films. This era is really categorized by the different types of animation styles that are in this that slowly disappeared definitely by like 2006. We get 2D, we get stop motion and CGI, and a lot of studios don't necessarily play around with this, so I find this era really unique and generally like animation history when it comes to one major animation studio. And the DreamWorks formula, especially in this era, is very unique and helps lay the groundwork for what's to come. And when it comes to movies at the time, Ants all the way to Shark Tale, they all have a very distinct style and story that, while it doesn't always continue between each of those films in that period, seems to be a common thread that really helps to boost DreamWorks to like the next era after this, which I call the meme era. But what makes this era really stands out is that all the movies I just listed are all ones that Katzenberg has been officially credited with either producing or executively producing. After Shark Tale, Katzenberg is no longer officially credited with producing or executively producing any of the films. And I think you could tell that Katzenberg was sort of in charge because this era speaks of a really like high anti-Disneyness. It really feels like the antithesis of all the things that was made during the Disney Renaissance era, which kind of makes sense considering Katzenberg was kind of fully in charge of that. And you could call this direct change pettiness, or you could just say that Katzenberg was tired of making the same things after a while. In either way, these films definitely speak of like a high anti-Disneyness that definitely doesn't show up in their later work. Dean DeBlois, director of Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, had this to say when he switched over to DreamWorks Animation. The spirit of DreamWorks was different from my experience at Disney. They seemed to be bolder here. I found myself in early meetings saying, really? Can teenagers be carrying around sharpened weapons? Are we going to get letters from parents? And not only was the switch in animation just in the plot, but also in general the tone. Everything was darker, more adult, a little bit more edgy, and no two films show the differences in this more from DreamWorks than the first two films, which is Ants and Prince of Egypt. Part 4. Making a Film Library. The first films you make as a production company can really make or break you. Not only does it help foretell like incoming financial success, but it can also make you really like a critic's darling and make your next film something to look out for, might give you more cred in the biz, or it just helps establish a brand. So Katzenberg sort of knew this, which is why Prince of Egypt was originally supposed to be the first film to come out of DreamWorks, but things change. Now, Prince of Egypt and Ants are two very different films. Ants is definitely much more like smaller in scale. It's definitely, I guess, the more edgy of the two. There's a lot of curse words in there for a PG animated movie. And it's definitely more of a comedic type thing. While Prince of Egypt is this super big, epic, grand musical that's based off a biblical tale that goes through multiple different religions. And yet somehow the first film to come out of DreamWorks was Ants. Ants is about an ant who questions his life, changes society, and gets a girl. It came out on October 2nd, 1998, about a month before A Bug's Life. Why, you may ask? Well, let's put on our tinfoil hats and get on the conspiracy ride. So officially, Ants with a Z came from Nina Jacobson's pitch, and she was an executive at DreamWorks at the time. However, the idea for a movie called Army Ants was floating around at Disney as far back as 1988, which Katzenberg worked there at the time, so not too surprising. However, in 1994, supposedly the exact day that Katzenberg left Disney, John Lasseter, the head of Pixar at the time, pitched A Bug's Life to Disney executives. And some say Katzenberg originally learned about A Bug's Life and release date because he had dinner with John Lasseter one time, because they were buddies, because Katzenberg helped champion Toy Story. But that's not where it gets juicy. The real tea, as the kids say, comes from a rumor that John Lasseter had a conversation with the head of PDI. And the head of PDI told Lasseter that Katzenberg told the head of PDI that in order to finish the deal, it had to be under that Ants would be finished before A Bug's Life. And while this has never been proven and never will be, it is a fact that Ants until June 1998 was scheduled to be released in spring 1999, and then something changed. But is the plot of Ants anything similar to A Bug's Life? Not really. Ants is a very anti-Disney film. It features death, murder, cursing, therapy, things that Disney would never show. It's both darker in plot and tone, and also in color scheme, because man is this an ugly film. Ants' audience definitely seems to be more for teens and adults versus a full family film, which A Bug's Life definitely falls under. But did it work? Kind of, actually. While not a huge hit, and it didn't even manage to outgross A Bug's Life, Ants still was a financial success of sorts. With the budget estimated to be around $41 to $60 million, it ended up grossing $171 million at the box office, so not bad for the first film. Critics liked it, but personally I think this has more to do with the fact that at this point people were tiring of the Disney formula, and with Disney being the main source of animation at the time, they were looking for anything fresh and new. But either way, this still wasn't the huge financial success that Katzenberg wanted, so let's see how Prince of Egypt does. Prince of Egypt will come out in December 18th, 1998, and where Ants was very small in scale, Prince of Egypt was huge. A quick intro on the plot. Prince of Egypt is about Moses, who questions his life, he ends up changing society, and he gets a girl. And Prince of Egypt is also the first film of DreamWorks Animation to be directed by a woman. No, it's not solely directed by a woman, but a lot of animation projects aren't solely directed by any one person. Her name is Brenda Chapman, and if that name sounds familiar, it's probably because you've watched her other movie from Pixar called Brave. And the other directors of Prince of Egypt are Simon Wells and Steve Hickner. And look at that, DreamWorks is already ahead of Pixar by representation by exactly 1 point. It might be the baseline, but I'm just happy they did it, you know? And if you've ever seen Prince of Egypt, you could tell that there was a lot of work put into not only the animation, but the songs and everything. And it makes a lot of sense because Katzenberg really loved this film. This was supposed to be the film that completely changed the animation game. Again, like Ants, this film was kind of made under the ghost of Disney. Katzenberg originally pitched a Ten Commandments type animation film at Disney, but it was shot down. However, when he created DWA with Spielberg and Geffen, Spielberg encouraged the idea, and Prince of Egypt was thus born. It makes sense why Prince of Egypt was originally going to be the first film to come out of DreamWorks Animation. It's this really huge film, it's a beautiful musical, the animation is absolutely stunning. Katzenberg wanted this film to completely change the animation industry. It wasn't supposed to be a fairy tale. It's not supposed to be something light. It's supposed to be having these mature themes. Katzenberg thought of this film as bringing together like all three of the Abrahamic religions. He thought it would be that great and that successful, to the point where he not only talked to Christian theologians, but Jewish and Muslim theologians as well, even Arabic leaders, and you can see influences of each different book in the story itself. It's not just a biblical tale. Ironically enough, although he did all this research, Prince of Egypt ended up being banned in some Islamic countries for showing one of their prophets, so I don't know how much research they did, if they missed that one. And the plan was that after Prince of Egypt succeeded, that there would be a string of direct-to-video biblical sequels, which is one reason how we end up getting Joseph King of Dreams later. And no, I'm not discussing that movie because it's not a theatrical release and I refuse to watch it. But the question is, did Katzenberg's expectations live up to reality? Sort of. Critics liked it a lot. Christians loved it, but it was an okay financial success. With an estimated $50 million budget in marketing and a $70 million budget for the film, it made $218 million at the box office. So, not bad, but also not great. The marketing of this film kinda low-key killed it. While Katzenberg really wanted this film to not just be a typical family film, it was also marketed as such in the beginning, so there weren't really toys, there weren't really games to get kids excited. All they really had were collectibles and books. After it came out, DreamWorks kind of changed their tune, and you could find some interesting different marketing tactics to this day if you buy a Prince of Egypt DVD or look at it on Netflix or Hulu, wherever it is. But it's okay, guys. Prince of Egypt might not have been their great success, but the next movie is going to be great, right? No, it would not. So Road to El Dorado is the next film to come out of DreamWorks Animation, and it was kind of doomed from the start. It was in developmental hell for 5 years. It was supposed to come out in 1999, but got pushed back to March 31st, 2000. The original directors left due to creative differences, and new people were brought in halfway through the entire film. So what this also meant is there was a huge plot shift, Because originally, Road to El Dorado is supposed to be, again, this more serious, epic type film that Katzenberg tends to prefer, but he also wanted to add comedic moments into it. And comedy plus epicness doesn't always go together, so it was really hard to merge all the tones correctly. And once the new directors came in, a lot of the complex plot stuff they were trying to go for kind of got stripped away until we kind of get this hollow out shell that we know and love to this day. And originally this film was supposed to be PG-13, but as everything else got stripped for more simplicity, so did that to a nice PG rating. And I think this switcheroo that kind of happened halfway through production represents DreamWorks quite well at the time. They're trying to figure out what sells and what doesn't sell. And while Katzenberg really likes his epic films usually don't do well for the whole family. So finding the balance between these dramas and these epic type projects versus family films that still make you a lot of money was very hard for DreamWorks Animation, and I think that kind of represents their struggle all the way to their inevitable demise, that they just couldn't quite figure out how to balance things consistently film by film. This film is set in the Road to El Dorado during the Spanish colonization of the other half of the world, basically, and DreamWorks tried to make their film as accurate as they could. So they had the benefit of basically starting production after Pocahontas. So after seeing like the backlash and critiques that went with like how Disney like created the Powhatan tribe and how they like sexualized Pocahontas, they kind of decided to work and fix all that. Again, most of that also came from Katzenberg, so it's his fault in the first place. But when they were doing research, they tried to particularly do research into the Mayan tribe. But if you watch this film, it kind of feels like a hodgepodge between like the big three that American society knows about, so like the Mayans, the Incans, and the Aztecs. But they were aware of the whole white savior / deifying of the indigenous type trope that's been happening. So they try to avoid that by making Miguel and the other one not like these huge white saviors, while also not deifying the indigenous population, which is probably one reason why one of the priest is a villain at the end, although it really has no good purpose to be in there. So they were trying, sort of. I mean, if they really wanted to try, like personally, I wouldn't like over-sexualize like the only female character with the speaking role, but that's just me, so do you, DreamWorks. So after all this research and the simplification, this film kind of just ends up being about two guys who question their life, change society, and get the girl. And each other? Yeah, this film's kind of a bi icon, and I love it for that. Either way, this film did not work at all for audiences. It was DreamWorks' first official bomb. With a budget of $95 million, it made $76 million in the box office, so the critical consensus of this was, while somewhat funny, it had a very weak plot, which I think goes down to them stripping it all down to what it is. It kind of accidentally got the same Emperor's New Groove treatment, which is how we got that movie, but at least that one kind of succeeded. So yeah, DreamWorks not looking good so far. So at this point, we've got 2 missed successes and 1 absolute bomb. Let's see what we get next. The next film DreamWorks would release is Chicken Run in 2000, and it would be an absolute success. With a budget of $45 million, ended up making $225 million in the box office, and it wasn't DreamWorks' film. They just bought the distribution rights for that. They did not have anything to do with the production of it, so good for them, I guess. They originally bought the distribution rights in 1997. This would be the first time that DreamWorks would work with Aardman Animations, and the beginning of a vaguely tumultuous relationship. But now that we've got that out of the way, it's time. And make no regrets about this purchase. So Shrek is about an ogre who questions his life, changes society, and gets a girl. It's also DreamWorks' first official parody movie. And what is it parodying, you ask? Disney. The film definitely feels like a bitter ex trying to get over a bad breakup, and which it kinda is. So the plot represents a typical Disney Renaissance era movie, while like particularly like point by point, making fun of every aspect of Disney in a way that only a spiteful Disney ex-employee could do. But the film that we know and love of Shrek isn't how Shrek was originally supposed to go. So for those of you who don't know, Chris Farley, who, if I'm correct, was an SNL person, that was before my time, was the one who was originally supposed to be playing Shrek. So the original Shrek was supposed to be about a teenage ogre, a monster if you will, who didn't want to go into the family business of scaring people. Monsters Inc. Sorry, got a cold. But Chris Farley ended up dying in 97, and it kind of sent production into a total utter tailspin where everyone just kind of pushed Shrek off the map and assumed it would be a huge bomb for the studio. Everyone had such little faith in it that if any animators from like the other works I mentioned earlier were slacking off or doing a bad job, they would be sent to the employee named Shrek gulags to be punished by working on Shrek. And that has aged wonderfully. But eventually Mike Myers did end up with a position on the condition that they would completely change the story so he's not just voicing Chris Farley's Shrek, but creating a Shrek of his own. A Shrek that we all love. A Shrek that is love, if you will. And this decision to completely and utterly change Shrek created one of the most iconic animated characters of all time. Don't at me. With a budget of $60 million, Shrek ended up grossing $424 million at the box office in 2001. It was a huge success at the time. It won Cannes in 2002 and won the first Best Animated Feature award at the Oscars, beating Monsters, Inc. and the Jimmy Neutron movie. And current memes aside, Shrek truly was a huge success both financially and critically. It's became such a classic that it's the only animated movie from the 2000 millennia to be put into the Library of Congress. It ended up spawning a billion-dollar franchise, and it became a true icon not only in memehood, but also in pop culture. But not only was it just a huge financial and critical success, it did the most important thing. It finally beat Pixar and Disney at their own game. So at this rate, things are finally looking up for the company. They've had 2 successes in a row, and this next film is going to be so good. Their next 2 films would bomb very badly. The last 2 traditionally animated movies to ever come out of DreamWorks Animation came out right after one another in 2002 and 2003. So for Spirit, Katzenberg thought it would be a huge success, so he released it on Memorial Day weekend, the same weekend as Spider-Man and Star Wars Episode 2. That was Spirit. Spirit's budget without marketing was approximately $80 million. It made $123 million at the box office. Now I understand why Spirit bombed, but after rewatching it, I will say that it's a very unique animated film. Not only due to the lack of dialogue, but the story and setting itself is something that I've never really seen before. So it was a risk, and I could see why Katzenberg thought it would pay off. Plus, it had horses. Apparently, earlier drafts of the film was going to be even darker than what ended up happening. Also, I personally like the mystery if the earlier drafts had the horses talking or not. If anyone has some details on that, please let me know. I want to know. When it comes to the directing pair of this movie was also partially directed by a female director. Lorna Cook and Kelly Asbury were the ones who directed this, and they also got an Oscar nom because this movie was also nominated for an Oscar in 2003, but lost to Spirited Away, a movie that I do not like. So Spirit came and went with humiliating defeat, and it would only get worse. Sinbad, when it came out in 2003, would almost destroy the company. Probably the last film that directly has Disney's ghost attached to it. Originally, Disney announced that they would be working on a feature film script for a Sinbad movie in 1992. And that's really all the information I could find on it. Not really how it came from that to DreamWorks or anything like that. It really feels like DreamWorks just tries to bury all the information on the films that bomb that they've had, or at least they don't advertise it the same way they do as their huge successes. Either way, with a budget of $60 million, not including marketing, the film ended up grossing $81 million in the box office and ended up making DreamWorks lose a whopping $125 million. But luckily in 2004, DreamWorks would have a much better year. No, like seriously this time. Shrek 2 would end up grossing a total of $920 million in a box office for the studio. It was the highest grossing film of 2004, and it was nominated for Best Animated Feature and Best Original Song. It was completely and utterly huge for the studio, and Katzenberg ended up greenlighting Shrek 3, 4, and 5. So originally I was going to put Shark Tale in the next episode to be part of the meme era, but after lots of thought, I ended up shifting it over to this. Consider this a Spider-Man Far From Home after an endgame, if you will. This film will be the last film that Katzenberg officially, at least according to IMDb, executively produces. All of the large historical epics that DreamWorks tried to do in the beginning either completely and utterly bombed or just didn't succeed expectations. After the success of Shrek and Shrek 2, DreamWorks officially turned their back on the historical epic. Instead, they focused much more on comedic comedies and parodies. And Shark Tale is a perfect example of this, although it sort of fails at the heartfelt aspect. So Shark Tale is about a Will Smith fish that questions his life, ends up changing society, and gets a girl. And is also a gay metaphor? Apparently, certain Christian groups thought this movie was so gay and so trying to brainwash their children into accepting gay rights that they wanted to ban this movie. And one thing that you'll notice that after watching this movie that you've also noticed in Shrek and Shrek 2 is that there are multiple pop culture references everywhere throughout these films, and they keep showing up more and more. And the critics notice this, especially in this one, and very much dislike this film, not just for that, but for a lot of other valid reasons. So this film was a critical flop, but a financial hit. But the reason why DreamWorks are making these type of films isn't because necessarily artistic intent, but these movies hit and they hit big. It ended up grossing $367 million in the box office, although it only has a budget of $75 million. At the time, this was DreamWorks' second highest opening gross movie, the first one being Shrek 2, of course, and this movie still got nominated for an Oscar. It lost to Incredibles, rightfully so, but it was still nominated for one. And then thus, after Shark Tale, we begin our meme era of DreamWorks Animation, which will be in next episode. Part 4, the DreamWorks Formula. People act like DreamWorks doesn't have a formula, which I kind of get if you don't look into these films on a deeper level. But I strongly disagree with that statement, and I think the experimental era DreamWorks formula is not only very fascinating and interesting on its own, but it also helps set up the groundwork for future DreamWorks movies that will come out later. And if you don't know the formula for the experimental era, although I've stated it multiple times throughout this video, let's say it again, and if you know it, you can say it with me. DreamWorks formula tends to be about a dude who questions his life, changes society, and gets the girl. And although this might be oversimplifying some of their story ideas, I do think it's still very much true. And this formula definitely shows up in later DreamWorks, but less often and less frequent. Some other things that the experimental era does with its DreamWorks formula is that this era is particularly darker in tone than any other era of DreamWorks that will come. It's definitely more mature and epic, and I think that goes because Katzenberg really wanted to make mature and epic films. But all of them kind of bombed or didn't do good, so he moved to comedies. Instead of trying to appeal to the youngest audience, a lot of these films try to slow down and focus on more adult themes of fear and isolation and dread. Either way, these films are trying to tell us something and explain something about the world in usually a very melancholic manner. Ants, the first movie to ever come out of DreamWorks Animations, begins their scene with an ant in a therapy session where he questions his career and life choices and wonders if he's just an insignificant cog in a wheel. And the therapist tells him that he is. Albeit he's an ant, but you missed my point. Shrek is about a man who's forced to be comfortable with his monsterhood and believes he's absolutely unlovable because society treats him like a monster. And the films that don't directly talk about depression and isolation talk about history, colonization, and oppression. After the experimental era of DreamWorks, you really don't see anything by them that deals with historical events or anything like that. They definitely play in more of a realm of fantasy than anything else. And I do believe a lot of these shifts in tone and setting and plot do have to do with the fact that after 2004, Katzenberg takes a much less involved role in the animation process because he now has to run the company. Why, you might ask? Because in 2004, DreamWorks Animation would leave DreamWorks Pictures. A lot of these early films really do feel like Katzenberg finally getting a chance to make the films that he wasn't allowed to make at Disney. It truly is the equivalent of a teenager leaving home for the first time and going off to college. Part 6. On My Own. In 2004, DreamWorks Animations will officially split from DreamWorks Pictures and become their own public company according to the NYSE. And in this new division, Katzenberg would head the company, while Spielberg and Geffen would be consultants. DreamWorks Pictures would end up getting bought by Paramount in 2004 for $1.6 billion. It's still kind of their own studio today, but it's been through a few ups and downs, a few ownership changes, but at the moment it's owned by Amblin Entertainment with Spielberg, so Spielberg still kind of is in control of DreamWorks Pictures. Some of the films that DreamWorks Pictures will be making under Amblin Entertainment are Ghost in the Shell, featuring Asian American actress Scarlett Johansson. But back to DreamWorks Animations. With DWA now as a public company, their stock is now directly tied to how well their films do. So a choice sort of had to be made. Do they continue to make these 2D epics that keep failing, or do they focus more on these 3D comedies that do really well in the box office? And I think we all know their answer. So yes, this was the Experimental Era, the first episode of a 4 to 5 part-ish series of DreamWorks Animations on the whys, whos, wows, and whats. I spent almost 3 months researching all of this, so if you like this video even a little bit, please share, like, or subscribe because please validate me. This has been Why, and if you've watched this far, you actually are just cooler than anyone who stopped halfway through, and I hope you have a wonderful day. So, peace out, homies, and may the Shrek gods be with you.